We have already adverted to the fact that in the 3rd century BC the law had come to be conceived as the final and supreme revelation of God. When once this idea of an inspired law adequate, infallible, and valid for all time, had become an accepted dogma of Judaism, as it became in the post-exilic period, there was no longer room for independent representatives of God appearing before men, such as the pre-exilic prophets. God had, according to the official teachers of the Church, spoken his last and final word through the law, and when the hope was expressed that in the coming age a prophet will arise, he was only conceived as one whose task was to decide questions of ritual or priestly succession, or legal interpretation in accordance with the law. Thus in 1 Mace. 4:46 the stones of the defiled altar of burnt offering were to be put aside till a prophet arose, and similarly in 14:41, cf. 9:27, the high priesthood of Simon was to be provisionally acknowledged till a prophet arose, who could decide on the validity of his high priesthood accordingly. The first fact we are to recognize is, that from the time of Ezra and Nehemiah the law has not only assumed the functions of the ancient pre-exilic prophets, but it has also, so far as it lay in its post-7 made the revival of such prophecy an impossibility. The prophet who issued a prophecy under his own name after the time of Ezra and Nehemiah could not expect a hearing unless his prophecy had the imprimatur of the law. This is exactly the view of the rabbinic scholars. Thus they taught that whereas the prophets and hagiographa will in the future cease to be, for there is nothing in them which is not suggested in the law, Jeremiah Meg. 7 Orph, the law itself would endure forever, Tanit 9, and that any prophet who attempted to annul one of its laws would be punished by death, Toseph. 14:13, and that though all mankind should combine, they could not abolish one yod of it, Cand. R. V. 1:1. Lev. R. 19, Num. R. 17, and C. Secretary Jevish in Psych. 12. 197. It is now clear, I think, that from Nehemiah's time onward prophecy could not gain a hearing, whether the prophecy was genuine, that is, appeared under the name of its actual author, or was anonymous, unless it was acceptable in the eyes of the law. From the class of genuine and anonymous works we pass on to the 3rd division, the pseudonymous. There are at all events 2 of them in the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes, and Daniel. With the former we have here no concern. But how are we to explain the pseudonymity of Daniel and the other apocalyptic works of the 2nd century BC, such as Enoch, Jubilees, and the Testaments of the 12th Patriarchs? This pseudonymity has already in part been explained. These apocalyptists do not merely repeat the old truths, which in so many cases had become the mere shibboleths of a petrified orthodoxy, they not only challenged many of the orthodox views of the time and condemned them, but they also carried nay more, according to Zech. 13. 1-5, a late work written from the priestly standpoint, if a man declared himself to be a prophet his father and his mother were to put him to death. By such drastic measures prophecy was driven forth from the bosom of Judaism, and has never since been suffered to return. The task of leading the people into more spiritual conceptions, alike as regards the present life and that which is to come, devolved henceforth on apocalyptic, and that a pseudonymous apocalyptic. Forward the revelation of God in the provinces of religion, ethics, and eschatology. Against the reception of such fresh faith and truth the law stood in the way, unless the books containing them came under the aegis of certain great names in the past. Against the claims and authority of such names the official representatives of the law were in part reduced to silence, at all events in the case of the Book of Daniel. But there is another ground for the adoption of pseudonymity, and when we combine it with the autocracy claimed and exercised by the law we have the grounds for which we are in search. This second ground is the formation of the threefold canon of the law, the prophets, and the hagiographa. Before the formation of the prophetic canon, anonymous prophetic writings could gain currency and acceptance on the ground of their inherent worth, but when once the prophetic canon was closed, no book of a prophetic character could gain canonization as such. Now the collection of the prophets existed pretty much in its present form about 300 BC, though additions may have been made to Hosea, Isaiah, and Zechariah, and c. subsequently to that date. Into the Hagiographa were received all books of a religious character, of which the date was believed to go back as far as to the time of Ezra. To this third division of the canon books were admitted down to AD 100, and the last were Canticles, Ecclesiastes, and Esther. Daniel was admitted to this third canon at some period in the 2nd century BC. Daniel was admitted into the canon in the belief that it was written by the ancient worthy of that name, but not among the prophets, for the prophetic canon was closed, but among the Hagiographa. The example of Daniel was followed by Jewish apocalyptic down to the 13th century AD. It was pseudonymous and remained pseudonymous, for the law was supreme, inspiration was officially held to be dead, and the canon was closed. Moreover, all the great Jewish apocalypses which were written before AD 10, and which carried on the mystical and